I am so excited to introduce you to these ladies. So, here with me, I have Molly, Evan, Molly, Lyndsay, Erin, and Lisa, okay? These women all came together after they all had children born with a cleft, and they have an incredible story to share today. But before we go any further, I'm going to attempt to explain to you the connection between these women. And I'm going to warn you, this is like one of those middle school math problems where like the train leaves and then like the time changes and like, it's basically that. And it's more complicated because two of them have the same name, but we're gonna give it a shot, okay? It's the end of the day, I don't know, but here we go. So, Molly, yeah, you should raise your hand, do it, that helps. Molly, and Evan's husband, Kyle, all know each other from graduating in the same high school class in Peoria, Illinois. Lyndsay and Erin, those two over there, both graduated from the same high school a few years prior, and they also already knew Molly R. through family connections. And then Lisa then met everyone else here at the first Cleft Proud Peoria fundraiser last summer. Did you follow that? There's a quiz later, and if you can't tell it to me back, you don't get a drink ticket. I made that up. I don't think there's drink tickets. Okay, so, Molly, you learned that your son would be born with a cleft at your 18-week ultrasound, and you soon after connected with Evan, whose husband is an old high school classmate of yours and whose newborn son was born with a cleft. What was it like finding out news like that at your ultrasound, and can you tell us more about what prompted you to reach out to them and how you reconnected?
So my husband and I at 15 weeks had a gender ultrasound, so then we knew the gender at 15 weeks. So when we went in for our 18-week ultrasound, we already know the gender, and so what I was looking for in the ultrasound was these dominant lips that his sister had on her ultrasound. So they're going through all the different parts of the body, and I noticed the ultrasound tech keeps going over his face, keeps going over his face, keeps going over his face, and finally, like, she ends it. And I was like, so how's everything look? And she's like, well, and I said, he has a cleft lip. And she's like, yeah, I just can't find his upper lip. And I was like, wow, okay. And I started crying, and my husband looks at me and says, what's that? And I was like, we'll get to that. And so then I'm super close with my family, and right away I text both my sisters, my brother, my mom, and my dad, and I said, so our buddy has a cleft lip, and everyone's response was, it'll be okay, it'll be great, don't even worry about it. Well, to me, it was like easy for them to say because they weren't the ones that had a baby that, like, as a mom, you're like, what did I do during my pregnancy that caused this cleft lip? What did I do that is causing my son to have this? So anyways, my sister, right after we found out about the cleft lip, took me down to the Ozarks, and she said, go take a break. And I said, oh, okay. So she took my 2.5-year-old at the time on a break, and she's like, you need to go take a nap. So I went up, and I immediately started researching hospitals, and I was calling hospitals to set up appointments because as a mom, that's the only thing you can do for your child. And then I was like, oh my gosh, Kyle Inkhen's baby just had a cleft. So I immediately reached out to Kyle, and I was like, hey, Justin and I just found out that our baby has a cleft lip. We don't know about his palate yet. How are you guys doing? What can I do? Where do I go from here? And Kyle was like, thank you so much for reaching out, kind of told me what him and Evan were doing. And the one thing that he said to me was, the idea is way worse than the actual concept of it. And that, like, stuck in my head. And he's like, if you need anything at all, please reach out to me. And, there was a sense of, like, call me, knowing, like, hey, if Kyle can do it, and Evan can do it, like, maybe I can do it too. And so that's kind of how, like, Evan and I got reconnected.
So incredible. Okay. So Evan, when Molly reached out, your son was still very young, and your family was just beginning your cleft journey. At the time, had you known any other parents whose child was born with a cleft that you could speak to? And how did your relationship with Molly evolve? And what did it mean to you to have someone else who understood what you were going through?
So when we found out at our 23-week ultrasound that our son Patrick was going to have a cleft lip and palate, we did not personally know anyone else that had a kid or that had a cleft palate, lip or palate themselves, which is, kind of normal not to know anyone. So we took, we took the news pretty hard because it was a topic completely off of our radar. We weren't really expecting it at all. So we had some family and friends reach out to us saying that they had known someone in the past who had a kid with a cleft, and so I connected with some of them, and they offered, support, and it did give me a lot of reassurance that, our baby was going to be okay. But we never really formed a lasting connection or support through them just because their kids were a lot older than Patrick and were kind of in a different stage of life than we were. So then I turned to social media and actually looking through a lot of the cleft hashtags, like hashtag cleft lip and palate, hashtag cleft cutie. I found a lot of moms on Instagram who were being really candid about their babies' experiences, and their babies were born really recently, so they're going to be more the same age as our son. And seeing their experiences going through feeding difficulties, surgeries, and tips to help get through surgery, that provided us a lot of support to kind of go through it with them, even if it was just on social media. So then when Molly reached out, it was a shock to us to be like, oh my gosh, we already know, or we know someone now who is going to go through the same thing. We aren't alone in this. And, first we just wanted to pour our hearts out to them and answer any questions they had, give them support, and, try to help them not worry as much because we had done a lot of worrying already. So then, as sympathetic as we felt towards them, it was also kind of like a breath of fresh air to be like, wow, we aren't alone in this. There's someone else that we know, that we know personally is going to go through it too, that we can kind of share the experience with. And it then also became cathartic to be able to share our experience with them and to help them through it. And then, so ultimately it just meant a lot that she reached out to us because it's started our process of being able to give back to someone else through our journey, even though our son was only a couple of weeks old when we weren't very far into it, but it definitely made us feel less alone by you reaching out.
So Molly, around the same time as other Molly and Evan were connecting, you learned that your son would also be born with a cleft. You hadn't been in touch with Molly and Evan in over a decade, but you had recently seen their Facebook post about their sons, and you reached out to them. How did you feel when you saw two people you knew had sons with clefts? It would be great if you could tell us more about your story and what it was like to reconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. So our cleft journey began at our son Miles' 20-week anatomy scan, and that is when we first saw, and the only time we ever saw his cleft before he was actually born. The cleft came as a complete surprise, but as you mentioned, I think the most shocking aspect of it was the fact that two of my relatively close friends, Molly Reeser and Kyle Inkhen, had shared stories on social media about their sons that were either born or about to be born with a cleft lip. Prior to seeing either of their posts, I had never met anybody with a cleft lip, nor did I know anything about cleft lips, so obviously I had a ton of questions. My husband and I, we currently live up here in the Chicago area, so we are very blessed to have such a wonderful medical team. But every single follow-up ultrasound that we went to and every specialist visit that we went to was kind of filled with the worst case scenarios. And it kind of just put me in this whole spiral of anxiety, and I knew at that time it would benefit me to connect with both Molly and Evan. So I did not have either of their phone numbers, so I kind of slid into their DMs on social media. And I recently went back and I read the messages that I sent to both of them, and in the message I sent to Molly, I said, there's so much comfort in knowing somebody from my hometown is going through this journey as well. And I feel that couldn't be truer then as it is today. These women all up here have helped me take something that my husband and I once kind of felt was such an isolating experience and turned it into a community. These women have become such a support to me and my husband and my entire family. And as many speakers have mentioned today, it's kind of become a little bit of a safe place for me to share a lot of those unfiltered frustrations that I have felt through the journey in helping my son. We live so close to our medical team up here in Chicago. We took a very hands-on approach and got my son Miles a NAM. And we went in for weekly adjustments to his NAM and tortured him every single week to close the gap prior to his surgery. And I think it turned to have a remarkable outcome. However, it was a lot of venting to Molly Reeser on the phone, a lot of crying in my basement, and her telling me like how I can better tape him and just kind of really walking me through it. And it was definitely that support I needed to kind of rely on these people, because externally when people would reach out to see how Miles is doing, it was a very sugar-coated like, oh, he's so wonderful, which he is. But there is just like a lot of support that I needed. I think one of my favorite parts of having this support up here is the ability to just share wins with one another. It's wins that everyone in this room would understand, but people outside of this room probably don't. It's the first time Miles ever drank from a straw. Mass text message to everyone. When he's like making a new sound at speech class, mass text messages to everyone. And they are just as excited as I am, and it's just such a genuine feeling knowing that these girls are here with us. So overall, I know we are all very, very blessed that we had the support of one another through this, and it's something that I do not take for granted at all. And I think that's why I personally, and I think all these women up here, feel so passionate about raising awareness for Cleft, raising money for Smile Train, and just really sharing our son's story, because I want to make sure that if there's ever a mom out there who is in their 20-week ultrasound appointment and they discover that their unborn baby is going to have a cleft, that they don't have those unanswered questions. Like, they have a team of people who we will come on a little strong. We are very passionate, but I mean, we went and got drinks with one of our Cleft team nurses last night, and I said, like, give my number out to anybody. Like, let them know, like, I'm here to help. And if I can ease any sort of anxiety they have, I think it's such a game changer.
Yes. Oh, I can't take it. Okay. All right, Lyndsay, your son was born with a cleft soon after Miles was born, and you connected with Molly, and Evan. What was it like for you to immediately have such a strong group of families who knew what you were going through?
So we received Brody's diagnosis at his 22-week ultrasound, and my immediate thought was, I need to reach out to my uncle, who is a local plastic surgeon, who had actually done cleft repairs on mission trips. So after, of course, calling my mom, that was my next call. You know, it was, as most parents, I'm sure, have felt the same way. I know we all have. It's a rush of so many emotions: anger, frustration, guilt, anxiety, fear. You know, I wanted to feel better. So we met with my uncle actually later that day. And as a nurse practitioner, you know, again, you know, kind of my more thought was, okay, medically, what are we going to do? I walked away, though, from that experience because my uncle is very surgeon. So those of you that know surgeons, they're very straight to the point. Emotion is not included. I felt that, though, you know, while I felt more secure from a medical standpoint, my mama heart was not satisfied. I needed someone to tell me that it was going to be okay, but I needed somebody that has been through this to give me that. And so, like many of us have done, I turned to social media, including the two speakers that were just previously on, to actually, you know that it is going to be okay. It took me a while. You know, I feel like my husband and I had to really cope with this information, and it actually took a while for me to reach out to these girls, because for me, I'm a private person, and I really need to process my own feelings. But I quickly, you know, once I got to that point, reached out to Molly, who eagerly, come meet Grayson. Just come meet him. Come meet how wonderful he is.
Just hold him.
Yeah, here. And so that was obviously so helpful, and, you know, really helped ease me into this idea that Brody was going to be okay. I also was in contact with Molly's mother-in-law, and talking with her, again, my feelings were eased. I hadn't known Molly closely. I'd known of her. I'm slightly older than these ladies. But, it took a little while for me to reach out. But when I did, it was just as much eagerness to ask what I need. What do you need? What can I help you do? Please don't ever hesitate. And I think one of the biggest things I appreciate from these ladies is really giving me validation for all the feelings I was feeling prior to meeting Brody. I don't think other people can really understand the amount of anxiety and the actual guilt that I felt, because it's the fear of the unknown. They gave that to me at a time that I desperately needed it. Of course, the second I met Brody, all that went away, because that's just how it works. But, they were there at that point, which I think is something that we all feel pretty strongly about, is really giving other moms and dads and families that it's going to be okay. That confidence that I know it's a lot, and when you're ready, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to be here to support you. After the fact, I had so much support from both of them. The Inkhens came in a little bit later, but I've since gotten a lot of support from them too. But I called Molly my cleft angel because we dealt with a NAM as well in taping, and she would have step-by-step tutorials about how they were taping Miles. That is something that is just, I couldn't put a price on that. During that frustrating time, it just was that reassurance and that confirmation, that we can do this together. You're not alone in this. And so I'm truly grateful for everything these ladies have given to us.
Erin, tell us about how you got involved with this group. Your son is 8 years old now. Did you have this kind of support as he was going through his initial treatment? How did the fundraiser come to life, and what makes the fundraiser so special to you all?
Yeah, so my story was a little bit different. Unfortunately, we didn't know that Hudson was born with an incomplete cleft palate until we went to a doctor's appointment and had to ask the doctor if his mouth looked typical. We knew that Hudson's feeding was taking a lot longer. The formula wasn't staying down as well. He had failed a couple hearing tests. But we trusted the medical doctors to let us know that something wasn't right. So when the doctor said he had a cleft palate, my husband and I were filled with tons of emotions. I think we were in complete shock, sadness for sure, frustration that they didn't tell us and we didn't have time to plan. But reflecting now, all those feelings were just based on the uncertainty and the lack of knowledge that we had about what a cleft palate was and the treatment that can be provided for them. So I feel like our journey is a little bit different just because we didn't know anybody around us that experienced what a cleft palate was or the cleft lip, and so we were pretty isolated. We felt lonely at times. We definitely Googled, who doesn't Google and research and try to make those connections, bad, good, or otherwise. But our journey was a little bit different until I saw Molly's Facebook post, and she just initially said that her son was going to be born with a cleft lip and potential cleft palate. And so I just felt like, based on our journey, I needed to give back and be vulnerable and reach out to her and message her and to let her know that I shared Hudson's story and that everything's going to be okay. It's challenging, but being able to be there and share a lot of different messages and support for one another was very uplifting and got us rolling with the fundraiser. So Molly had reached out to me and said that Lyndsay and Molly were thinking about forming a fundraiser. And so, of course, I was like, sure, I would love to be able to throw a really great party and celebrate our children. And with recruiting Evan and doing a lot of Zoom calls and discussions, and coming up with what do we want the name to be, what organization would we like to make sure that we're highlighting, who would we like to give back to. We landed on Cleft Proud, Peoria Proud, just highlighting, obviously, a lot of hashtags are Cleft Proud, and that we were proud moms, and that we wanted to bring awareness to the Peoria community. And so from that, you can see that we throw really great parties. And more importantly, our mission for our fundraiser was to be able to share our stories, provide an outlet of support for other families that were also maybe beginning their journey or were going through their journey and just wanted to be there. And then, highlight Smile Train and being able to provide services for others that can't afford it. And so that's kind of how the Cleft Proud, Peoria Proud fundraiser turned out. We had our second fundraiser. Was that last weekend or the weekend before? It's been so blurry. But we were proud to share that we've raised over $60,000 in those 2 years. Yeah. And it honestly is pretty remarkable. I feel like our community has just really come together. It's been an outlet for our families and friends to come together and be able to celebrate. And more importantly, just show the pride that we have and celebrate our kids that have just been going through some tough times, but being able to see that they can grow up together and experience life like anyone else. So
I think that's a really good point, too, kind of from what we've been talking about today, about what do we do to make sure these kids know, and, they know you're celebrating them. You're having this big, huge party fundraiser, and, they're never going to doubt that you're proud and loud about it. Okay, so close. All right. Lisa, you became a part of this group after attending their first fundraiser for Smile Train, and then you just recently helped put on the second one a couple weeks ago. You had attended this fundraiser after learning your daughter would be born with a cleft lip and palate. What was it like for you seeing this strong community and being welcomed into it before your daughter was even born?
Yeah, so very similar to their stories, we found out that our daughter Olive would be born with a cleft lip at my 22-week sonogram. And we left that appointment with very similar emotions, with lots of questions, lots of worry. And my husband and I, we had a hard time finding good answers and good information from our local medical community. And so about a month later, I decided I wanted to make a social media post to just let everybody know, in my network about this diagnosis. And so I made a post, and I was actually really overwhelmed by the response that I got. It seemed like several of the people, almost everybody, had an experience with cleft in some way, shape, or form. And through that post, one of my dear friends reached out and gifted us 2 tickets to go to this Cleft Proud, Peoria Proud fundraiser. And this dear friend also went to high school with them, so it was another little connection there. And so I couldn't believe that this was going on in my town, and that really got us excited, but also a little nervous. I hadn't actually met any of these people in real life yet, and so I was 31 weeks pregnant, and we went to the first fundraiser. And basically took my time. I was a little nervous, and so we took our time, finally mustered up some courage, and just went up to Evan actually first and introduced myself. And that's my daughter. She really probably wants to be up here. She's very vocal. So we went up to Evan and just started talking to them, and then went through and met some of the other families. And hearing their stories and seeing how well their kids were doing, it really did give us confidence going forward. I think before the event, there was this building pressure, kind of holding your breath. And then after we left the event, it was like we could exhale and just breathe a little easier. And, then before she was born, we had a path to follow. And so we really leaned on their experiences, and we visited Lurie's Children's Hospital up here and, asked all those questions, and that way we knew a little bit more of what to expect. And then after after she was born, we had this group of friends now, and we called and texted them every part of the way, and they were, like they said, more than willing and very eager to help, which was amazing, and super grateful for that. And so I was texting them about her feeding and about her NAM and about all the different taping techniques and pre and post surgery, things like that. And so I feel really fortunate to have met these gals, and I really do feel like it was an answer to prayer. And you know, all of this happened because of this fundraiser, and it's really what brought us all together.
You ladies have such a unique and beautiful story, and it just truly speaks to the power of the Cleft community. I personally want to thank you for all you're doing to raise an awareness. You give so openly and honestly, and it's so beautiful. And I know that the impact is going to be really far and wide. I'm not sure which one of you is going to let my husband know that we're relocating, but you can work that out. You can work that out amongst yourselves, and I'll give you his number. But we will now take some questions in the audience. I'm sure you have many. You should have many, because you're probably still working this out in your head like I am. But.
So I'm so curious to know what further questions have you been asking within your community? I mean, I'm sitting here listening to your story as a group and going, wow, they're all from this area. I can't even imagine how much of a combination it must be to have this community of each other and the support system that you have, but also the shared why are we all from this one area, and why are all of our children affected in this way. What questions have you been asking? Who have you been asking them of? And what answers or non-answers have you received?
So the four of us, our children were all born within a year, actually. And out of us 5, I think 8 of the 10 parents went to the same high school.
Because my husband, her husband, her husband all went to the same high school also.
As well. And I think
so 8 of the 12 parents went to the same high school.
I think this event right now, I don't think we've realized until we came how exceptional our story is, and how, I don't think we recognize that. I don't think we realized how, maybe we need to start asking questions. In the healthcare field, Evan's in the healthcare field, I think we asked questions when we were, I think we all asked questions when we were pregnant and given this diagnosis. I think it's a process, but I think that, again, this in talking with some of the people with Smile Train especially, the fact that they were kind of astounded by our story, I think that's giving us really an idea of how significant this is.
And I also think another thing is we really haven't thought about the next step to be hey, let's research this, because mine is 2.5, her boy's 3, she's pregnant. I feel like right now we went through so much in that first year of their life that besides Olive, no one really has a surgery coming up. So we're kind of just taking a fresher breath air and enjoying it. Not that we didn't enjoy them when they were having their surgeries, but it's not hey, we have a doctor's appointment next month or the next month or something like that. We want to take time to enjoy them. And this fundraiser takes a lot of time. Our husbands, we have to give them a lot of credit, because on Tuesday nights at 8:00, we are on our Zoom meeting and they are putting our kids to bed. So I think a lot of it is maybe we don't know where to start with it, but we're also trying to give back to the Peoria community by saying hey, if this is going on with anyone else, here is this fundraiser you can come to. Like after our fundraiser, I had someone reach out to me, hey, I have this friend whose son or daughter was born with it, and they're going to Lurie's too, where 4 of our kids went to get their surgeries. Do you mind if I connect you? And I'm like, absolutely not. And then, you know, like we said, we have this mass text. So I was like, you guys, we have someone else coming into our group. And they're like, don't push it too much, Molly, but give me all the info. But like I said, we're always, yeah. So I think right now, as much as we want to research and find out what it is, I think that like we're just trying to give back more than that, in my opinion.
I think we're recognizing how lucky we are to have that support and how can we give it to other people. I think that's really been our priority, is really just to try to, again, help people have that it's going to be okay. You know, I think that's really one of the biggest things that we've been focusing on.
But if you guys know where we should start
Yes.
to research that, we are more than happy to dive into it
Yes.
at some point. Yeah, we just don't know where to start, really.
I'll be honest with you, I've not heard this happen to other families. I work with families, of course, being a speech therapist, but from the research end of it, I use your quote, sorry. I feel like the best place for you all to start is with your Cleft team and talk to the psychologist, the social worker, a genetic specialist, somebody that's affiliated with the team that can help you kind of do that research, because it is a little bit unusual that you're all in that same area. And I'm not trying to scare you, you know that. I would never do that because I've lived it, you know. But it would be helpful to know what's going on, because it could be, you know, one of the causes is genetic, environmental, or it could be, you know, through drugs or something, you know, so we know it's not that. But, you know, if there's something environmentally going on in your area, I think that it would be. But as moms, I think, Molly, I think you hit something that you said something that was very, very important, that you need a break. You enjoy that time with your kids, because I can't even imagine as an adult who I lived it, but I'm not a mom by choice for that reason. I can't imagine what your families have been through, and take that time for yourself. But I would encourage you, but I would start with your team. I think that's the easiest place for you to start, and because you all have that commonality. And then you're not getting information from 7 different sources that's just speculating. That's just my take. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have a question for the mom. I forgot your name. I'm so sorry. Erin. Okay. So you didn't know until post-birth about your child's palate. So I was curious. Like before I learned about clefts, I've like never looked at a roof of a mouth of a person before. I would never even like think to look, right? So I'm just curious. Like, how old was your son when you realized something was off, and what made you check it?
Yeah, so I think we were just it was my second child, so we were just kind of coping, trying to survive. He was definitely gaining weight. We changed the bottle several times. Basically, it was just flowing into his mouth at that point, and his feedings took quite some time, but we didn't really think to just look in his mouth. Obviously, researching now, they're supposed to do this initial swipes in the hospital, and then when he did his newborn, but, you know, I'll save that for some other time. Yeah, that's we won't address that today. But we noticed it when he was crying, that his mouth did not look typical.
Oh, like when his mouth was open. So how old? Like how many? Was it weeks in? Or?
He was 8 weeks. Yeah, and I can still visually see the doctor's face when we asked her, like, oh that's a cleft palate. You know, like we basically had to ask. You know, we would have found it, you know, but it was definitely
we were just in great shock. We weren't expecting that. Honestly, we had to do great research. We got in the back in the car, and we're like, cleft palate, what, like we just weren't prepared. So I don't know if it's better to be prepared or not prepared. But yeah, it was very interesting to experience that when you see your son, crying, and then you just think that doesn't look right. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question if nobody else does. So I'm just curious, and if you all think of any, I'm happy to come around still. But what maybe advice would you guys have for, folks in maybe other communities who kind of, find other people that they went to school with or had some connection with, or maybe not, but just kind of what advice would you have for them if they look to start a similar initiative?
So my husband and I live in St. Louis right now, so he hasn't even lived there in a long time either. We've been in St. Louis for the past 6 years. So, so for us, we, like I said, didn't really know anyone, but I think just reaching out to your doctor and saying like, hey, I am open to talk to anyone else who comes in, whether it's your surgeon or your OB. If you have this come across, just like give them my number and just let them know that you're open to talk about it.
I was going to say the same thing. Basically, reach out to the medical staff of who you're working with and just let them know that you would benefit speaking to another mom or another dad or anyone that is going through the same situation, because there's no greater advice than somebody who's in your same exact shoes. A doctor will tell you so many things, and some of it will apply to you and some of it won't, but a mom definitely will know kind of what you're going through and what you need to hear.
I was just going to say, actually, my doctors had like 3 different moms call me because I was like, if anyone needs me, call me. So the nurse and the doctor, like, they'll call me and be like, hey, I have this lady on the line. Obviously, I can't tell you her number. Can I connect you to her? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. And, I've heard some, like, stuff that I never thought about. And I feel like it's just, like they said, so important to reach out. And we're more than willing, obviously, to talk to anyone. Like, if someone's like, hey, I have a friend that's blah, 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 look at any of us up and we'll be like, yeah, join our mass text and we'll blow you up on stuff. But, yeah, I feel like that's just the most important thing is sometimes it's hard to share your journey, but I think sharing your journey almost takes a weight off of you. And it's something that just, I think it's helped all of us so much to do.
And I think the vulnerability of, social media has many, many, many cons, but almost all of you, I think, shared on social media, and that's the same thing I did when we found out. And I think that in itself, it's just such a connection that even if someone that isn't cleft affected, they know someone, and it's a great way to connect people. And
I would say I actually am a very private person. I'm not very active on social media, and we knew about our sons at our 20-week ultrasound, but it was until he was like 6 weeks after he was born that I actually went public and told people and shared a story and a picture of him, and it was like the support just came pouring in, and it just hasn't stopped since. So I wish I would have probably done it a little earlier. Obviously, I reached out privately to a lot of people, but even some of my really good friends from college and everything like that, they had no idea. So in hindsight, probably should have done it a little sooner, but everyone has to kind of take their own time.